everybody. It looks like a bunch of folks are on. We're still waiting for a bunch of folks to hop on, so we'll give it a couple minutes. Hopefully everyone's staying safe, and we'll get started here shortly.
Now would be the good time for you guys to do reading. I need an hour of quiet. Okay. Okay.
Like a few other folks are coming on, so just to let you guys know, we've got a few attendees on the line and Marcy's poised to start, but we're going to give folks a few more minutes to log in, and then we'll get started. So it looks like we've got at least critical mass. We'll go ahead and do quick introductions and get started. I see a lot of familiar names and a little familiar faces. We don't have Zoom on, but glad that folks could join us and hope everybody is staying safe among everything that's happening. I think everybody, I'm looking through the names, everyone probably does know Marcy really well. But just in case you don't, Marcy Mister's with us from the Campaign for Youth Justice. She's a fierce advocate and brilliant leader, and so she's going to lead us in today's webinar talking about everything that's happened with the Campaign for Youth Justice, where they are in the work, and what still needs to be done. It looks like we've got a couple hands raised already. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not. I'm going to see if I can unmute you, Barbie, in case you had questions. It looks like some folks are raising their hands. We'll try to answer those quickly. Hold on. Theoretically, this will be
Allison, I'm not able to see the hand raising.
I can. So
Okay.
Ashley, it looks like Ashley and Marilyn raised your hand. I don't know if there's something that you needed, had a question on Ashley. I just unmuted you. Okay. I'm going to mute you again. And then Barbie Fisher in Delaware, I don't know if you're intentionally raising your hand or if you had a question.
Nope, that was accidental.
Fair enough. I'm going to unraise your hand and we'll officially get started.
I tried to unraise it, but I don't know what's going on, so I'm just not going to touch it anymore.
It's all good. All good. I was going to say we will take questions at the end too, so if folks want, you can take questions as they pop up in the question box, but we'll open and we can unmute folks. There's about 20 people on, so we'll hopefully be able to either raise hands and ask questions that way or use the question box. Take it away, Marcy.
Okay, Allison, thank you so much. And thanks to NJDN for working with us on this series. I hope that everyone is taking deep breaths and taking breaks in your day. This is certainly a crazy time. And I was saying to Allison, gosh, are we really just going to go ahead and do this? But I feel like with the webinar that NJJN and CJJ led last week and some ongoing actions around ways that we can protect children who are in secure custody during this time, I think we just did want to go through and let people know kind of the status of the campaign. So for many of you, Allison, if you could flip to the next screen for me. The Campaign for Youth Justice was started 15 years ago with this very explicit mission, right? We wanted to make sure that young people that were being charged and sentenced as adults and housed in adult facilities were, that there was going to be a real intentional focused spotlight on this population, and that we were going to do what we could to get to change that practice, right? As a campaign, we were, we had very, very lofty goals, and we wanted to make sure that not only were we going to work with states to change the narrative, but we were going to build momentum, and that we were going to do that with impacted young people and families, right? Our strategies, I think many of you are very familiar with. On the next slide is this was kind of our basic campaign model, right? And we were going to use these different strategies to help reduce the number of children prosecuted as adults and to reduce the harm of children who are in adult facilities, and to make sure that we're where we can to elevate strategies that don't exacerbate racial and ethnic disparities of children who do get charged as adults. So this is what we set out to do and have been doing for the past 15 years. As you guys know, Liz Ryan started this, and in 2014, my job was to keep it going. We have centered our work, the next slide, on 3 major anchor campaigns that many of you have been engaged in a very intimate way. One are the Raise the Age campaigns, which have had tremendous momentum over the past 5 years. Another is to end or reduce particularly automatic transfers. Again, I like to call this our sleeper campaign. It's a little harder to message. It's very different state by state. But I will say that we've had 23 states that have reduced automatic transfer. And then the last one really is focused on a federal strategy, and that is how can we use federal laws to remove youth from adult jails and prisons. Today I have Raise the Age focused in orange, and that's because that's going to be the focus of today's call. We'll get to the other 2 over the next couple of months. So what have we been able to win so far? And I'm sharing this because, next slide, oh, you got it, sorry. I'm sharing this because the Campaign for Youth Justice has worked with strategic planners over last winter, and then with our board this earlier in January and February, and we have decided that at the end of 2020, we will be winding down our operations. And we feel like as a community, as a movement, there is a lot of wins. This does not mean that the work is going to stop. It just means that having a national campaign focused on this issue is going to wind down and move towards more in-depth state work. So here are some of the things that collectively we need to celebrate. First of all, we've had 40 states and DC changing more than 100 laws that have kept kids out of the adult system. Another lesson we've learned here is that most of those states, once they changed one law, were also able to change at least 2, and in multiple states, 3, 4, and 5 laws. So one lesson from there is that there definitely is more than one bite at the apple. Usually the reforms lead to more reforms when we realize who these children are and when they're and the fact that their outcomes are better when they're treated as children. And then the second lesson we've learned there is that we really need to focus on that narrative change language from the beginning if we don't want certain children to be left behind. Okay, the next slide. We have also had 2 federal laws that have helped with jail and prison removal. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, as many people know, have the youthful inmate standard. That youthful inmate standard means that children under 18 have to be housed separately from those who are over 18, and when in public and any sort of public place, they need to be monitored more closely and escorted by correctional officers. That PREA law has led to many states raising the age because it simply was easier to remove the 17-year-olds than it was to comply with PREA, particularly on the prison side, even though the standards have been applied widely in jails and in prisons. The other law, obviously, is the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. The jail removal provision that was reauthorized at the end of 2018 is, we think, a really, really hopeful opportunity to change this. There are still 3 to 4 times as many kids in adult jails that there are in adult prisons. But I do want to say that we have 70% of kids right now who are starting in juvenile detention at this point. So looking at the number of states that have active legislation in the works, we know that the pandemic and health crisis has shortened people's legislative session outside of emergency responses and budgets. But I think I'm really, really impressed by the states that have already introduced laws to come into compliance with the act. There are currently only 7 states where the presumption is to hold youth in adult jails. The vast majority have a may language, so there's actually not a lot of tweaking that needs to be done on the legislative level. And we'll be talking a lot more about this issue in May when we have the webinar on jail removal. Next slide. So another win, the number of young people who have been charged as adults has decreased 70%. When we opened, that number was estimated to be 250,000. And then we worked with Melissa Sickman and Chuck to come up with this. They were using 2015 numbers, which is the most recent numbers they had. And at that point, it was 76,000 young people a year. This is before 4 states, Louisiana, North Carolina, New York, and South Carolina, implemented their raise the age laws, and before Michigan and Missouri passed their laws. So we anticipate that number is actually much lower at this point once those states have become implementing their raise the age laws. But that's a huge drop even before those young people. Before those states changed their laws in terms of raise the age. So 70% reduction already in 2015. Another win on the next slide, Allison, is that we have seen a significant drop in the number of young people who are sleeping in adult jails and prisons. The numbers dropped 48% since we opened in 2005, from about a little under 10,000 a night. Now we've got about 4,100 a night. And again, we think that this number is going to continue to fall once that jail removal provision from JJDPA gets in full effect at the end of next year. The other thing I'll say about this is the numbers were even higher before we started. So if you're looking at the peak number, you were talking about 13,000 young people sleeping in adult jails a night. And so again, the movement here is in the absolute right direction, both through deep incarceration and in cases where places have determined that kids can't be safely released while they're pending trial. They are increasingly likely to be held in youth facilities. Next slide. We also see a lot more data and research that exists in support of removing youth from the adult system. I know briefly the campaign has put out more than 30 pieces of research and briefings in partnership with many of you. The states have all put out important information on this. We've had a lot of data bills pass that now we have about half the states that report regularly, not just on judicial waiver, but on the number of kids in the adult system. Unfortunately, the data, there's still a pretty significant gap on what happens to the kids once they're waived up outside of judicial waiver. And there's a limit in how many states report on racial and ethnic disparities once they are statutorily excluded or automatically transferred to the adult system. But at least we're starting to see some movement in the state level on getting that data. JJDPA does also require JJDP to have a study that reports on this. So we're hopeful that that will happen in the next year or two. Next slide, Allison. And then we really believe strongly that the narrative has to shift. And a lot we've seen, again, I feel like what we've seen is the narrative shift around kids in the adult system without any sort of review or hearing. I think it gets a little bit trickier when you are talking about specific charges, which obviously we don't think is the right thing to do, because we know that it is not the charge that predicts any sort of future criminal behavior. But in terms of narrative change, I'll say, you know, watching what happened in New York a couple weeks ago with the Columbia student, having the editorial board weigh in and say even children as young as 14 shouldn't be treated like adults is a huge difference from where we saw them back in the 1990s with the Central Park case. So we're seeing some changes there. And I think the other thing I should point out is that the public still does believe, we've had many, many states do polling. It has remained consistent even after states have changed their laws, that people across the board want rehabilitation as the primary response to young people who are engaged with the justice system. And so that hasn't changed. It is consistent whether people are Democrats or Republicans, where they live in the country, or whether they have been victims of crime. The other thing I think that has been relatively more recent, there have been some of the progressive prosecutors that have been able to jump on conservative groups, particularly libertarians, some law enforcement groups. I'm thinking of LEAP in particular, that have really come out with strong statements, the National Sheriff's Association, in support of children being treated like children. And those are some pretty heavy weights. I know that it's certainly not universal, but I think we have some tools now where we can keep pushing on that narrative change. But as I alluded to earlier, this narrative shift is not gone far enough yet. And children who are engaged in violence are left out of the narrative way too often. So I think that's kind of where this work needs to go. Next slide, Allison. And then, so where are we in terms of where the field needs to shift on the adultification of youth? There's two things that are still driving a lot of kids into the adult system. One is I'm clumping a lot of things into when I'm saying automatic transfer. That could be mandatory judicial waiver, that could be direct file, that could be statutory exclusion, right? The states that are listed here still have very high incidence, so very close to 200 or over 200 children every year that are waived. That used to be a much, much bigger number. So if you're looking at those numbers, most of them, I have stars next to Ohio and Tennessee, because we know that Shelby County and I'm just mess up the name because I always pronounce it wrong, Cuyahoga County in Ohio are seeing spikes in more transfer, but that seems to be episodic and driven by aggressive prosecutors in those places versus real big jumps in any sort of youth crime. And then obviously the three remaining raise the age states continue to drive a lot of 17-year-olds into the adult system. So if we can focus on those 11 states, we will, really have transformed this significantly over the next few years. Next slide, Allison. So one point that I think the sentencing project, Josh Rovner has made several times, which I think is something we all need to focus on as a field, is that racial and ethnic disparities of young people are continuing to grow. And so, you know, we wrote a piece on community-based alternatives. There are a lot of good alternatives that work with children who are engaged in violence, particularly family systems response, cognitive behavioral therapy. Not all kids need to be in secure facilities. No kids need to be in adult secure facilities. But the racial and ethnic disparities have continued to grow. And, you know, judicial waiver is the thing that is reported on most consistently and used most consistent by the most number of states, even though it's not the most number of kids. So what we did find is judges have increased. It's only been the past 2 to 3 years that the percentage of kids waived for person crimes exceeds any other charge. So on one hand, that means that maybe judges are starting to use some discretion and not sending up lower level cases or drug cases or weapons cases. At the same time, the racial disparities are growing to the worst that they've ever been. So we have got to help judges get other tools in their toolbox and understand that the youth justice system can handle these children and tell them how, right? So we think that at this point, really finding ways to partner with as many racial justice groups as possible to take this on as an issue will become really, really important, as well as people dealing with those racial disparities in sentencing, because obviously the transfer and the sentencing are coming closer and closer to being tied together, inextricably tied together, right? Allison, I think I want to see if anyone, I just gave a lot of data to people, but before I kind of go through what our timeline is and then focusing on Raise the Age, I just want to see, are there any questions that people have on what I've outlined so far in terms of, you know, in terms of where we've seen this movement go over the past 15 years? Any points of clarity that people need at this point? Anything that comes as a surprise?
Yeah, so if folks are able, if you want to either raise your hand or if you want to input a question in the question box. I see Josh Rovner is here, and so he said, thanks for elevating the work on racial and ethnic disparities. If you want to say more on it, Josh, I'm happy to unmute you and make space for that too. Folks are typing, no questions have come through yet. I'm just trying to see if there's any hands raised.
Good. That means everyone knows.
There's one. Hold on. There's one. Okay. Oh no, maybe it's Josh. Sorry. Josh's question is that he's here, but I think that's it. Unless we check one more time or see, and then you can go ahead with your timeline. Yeah.
Okay. So the next state. So in terms of what the next steps for the campaign are, so our plan was in June, we'll really be winding down legislative sessions. I am happy to say that there are 4 states that were able to get laws passed this session. Washington State did get a jail removal bill through. Virginia did raise the floor in direct file to 16. Maryland got their shielding bill through. I am forgetting a major state. Well, if I forgot you and you're on, raise your hand to remind me. There's another really good one that's out there. So again, the fact that 4 states were actually able to, Utah is the last one. Sorry, Utah got a very, very good restriction on their mandatory transfer statutory exclusion law which is gonna only allow 16 and 17-year-olds with murder or aggravated murder to be have original jurisdiction. Everyone else has to go into an individual judicial hearing, which is great. They also raised the floor on detention to 12, I believe. Those haven't been signed yet by the governor, but they got through sessions. So our plan was through June to wind down with the current state sessions in July and August, to go to all the conferences, share to people what the status is, what the wins are in the campaign. In September and October, to really prep for a really important YJM. The theme again this year will be to vote youth justice for obvious reasons. Have a big celebration October 9th, so you guys should mark that down in your calendar. And then in November and December, to wind down the actual operations of the campaign. And then in next year, really work deeply with a handful of states who are close to getting wins that would really get us close to ending, to getting to 100%, particularly on raise the age, and knocking off some of those, about 3 out of 8 of those automatic transfer cases. And we'd be working closely with the Sentencing Project as fellows next year in doing that. So that is where we are. So in preparation for that, what we wanted to do, and part of the reason for these webinars, is that we wanted to focus on each one of those 3 campaigns that I highlighted earlier in the slideshow: the raise the age, the automatic transfer, and then the jail and prison removal, and talk to people about where we are in those in that movement, and then hear from you what you need, both from states who are in the middle of implementation and those who are the 3 states who haven't yet passed their laws, to see what we can produce for you or connect you to before we wind down. So I'm going to start with the raise the age.
Marcy,
yep.
Just before we start, some folks had inputted some other wins they wanted to share with folks, so I was going to spin.
Great.
So somebody mentioned that Indiana bill is a win, so defeating the bad bill in Indiana, just making sure. And then Betsy Clark wanted to say that the rapid series of wins has been really impressive. So great work for CFYJ in keeping the folks in the states informed and providing tools and support for the advocacy. So shout out to you guys.
Thanks. Well, certainly, the great thing about a movement is it takes us all to do it. And I just have been so impressed by the tenacity of everyone on the ground, the advocates, the organizers, the young people and their families. We've really built a village, folks, and it's been impressive. I think we've exceeded our own expectations with how quickly this can happen. Even though some days it really doesn't feel quick, it feels terrible. It feels like forever. All right, so in terms of raising the age, in Indiana, I'm sorry, you did defeat a very, very important regressive bill, as did Georgia. They ran out of time too, so big applause for you guys for getting that done. So raising the age, we have had 11 states pass laws that have raised the age to 18. We've got 3 states that remain. And we have 1 state, I should have given Vermont a shout out here, that have gone beyond 18 to 20, and a handful of other states, Massachusetts, Illinois. And I want to point out that Massachusetts and Illinois are 2 of the 11 states that passed raise the age laws. They were at 17 before all this started. And then Colorado's also exploring that option. Okay, so here is a map that really clearly lays it out. And why this, the reason we started with raise the age is it is a really critical, in terms of that narrative change, I talked about what we have to do from the beginning. Raise the age campaigns, one, close the front door to the adult system, right? And they protect those early arrests from young people that we know that are impulsive, that we know are influenced by their peers, really provide opportunities for their records to not be public record yet. and for them to benefit from services and diversion programs. So if you look at this, this is a pretty remarkable map. Our green states are the states that have already passed and are implemented, are in full implementation of the law. Blue, you see Vermont there, shining alone, because it raised the age for misdemeanors beyond age 18. Louisiana has implemented the biggest part of their raise the age, and they're right on target with where they need to be. They will have 17-year-old serious felonies this spring get into implementation. And then Missouri and Michigan have recently passed laws and will both go into effect next year. So those are big, big, big wins. Where you see the red are still the states that haven't quite gotten there, but I want to say that Georgia has gotten pretty far this year. They got it passed through the first committee in the House. That's the first time they've gotten that far. That is to be applauded. Texas also got the bill through the House before, and there's continued movement on youth justice reform. That's still going to be sticky, but I think we can get there. And we know that Wisconsin has a lot of youth justice reforms that it's tackling, but that the governor, the current governor, is in support of raising the age. So this is winnable, guys, and we can get there, I think, in a pretty short amount of time. I do want to point out that even the seatbelt campaign had 2 states that didn't get there before they declared a win. So we are pretty close to seatbelts, and I'm pretty sure all of us know to buckle up when we get in the car. So these states are already feeling as outliers and are just trying to figure out how to get there. This next slide really talks about why we focused on raise the age so much, right? If you're looking at the number of kids who were in the adult system because of raise the age, you were talking about 175,000 in 2007. That's when Connecticut first raised the age. To 90,000 in 2014. We know that in 2015, this went down to 66,000 with those changes. And so our estimate is that this is going to be between 35 and 40,000 once we get the numbers from the states who have already passed. So that is an incredible drop in the number of kids that have come that have been blocked from coming into the adult system through raise the age laws. And we know that raise the age is a very simplistic kind of catch-all. There's a lot of different steps that states took to make sure that their juvenile justice system was shrunk enough to welcome 16 and 17-year-olds back into their youth justice system. And there was a lot going on. And I do want to point out that many states closed facilities while they raised the age. The next slide talks about, so the first one was how many kids were arrested. This is the number of kids that are in secure placement, the rate of kids in secure placement in the states that have raised the age already. So you'll look, and even though in 2017, these states included 16 and 17, and in some, 17-year-olds, and in a couple states, 16-year-olds. Look at secure placement has continued to go down even though raise the age has been implemented. You see a little bit of a tick up in Mississippi, but it's a pretty small number when you're actually looking at numbers. So you're looking at overall overwhelmingly decreases in secure placement. So that is something to be celebrated as you're bringing older kids into the juvenile justice system. So again, to debunk the myth that you guys need more beds, look, in every single state, it's lower than it was in 2007. So we do not need more beds to raise the age. Okay, next slide. So this is where I want to ask, and I need a lot of input, and if people aren't ready to give this input now, if you can be sending emails to me or Brian at the campaign, this is some of the things that we feel like we need to continue this work, right? I think the moral argument is done. We are not having to answer why should we do this anymore. That is very different from when Illinois, Massachusetts, and Connecticut first first raised their ages, right? They had to answer why and how. We are now at the how. How can we move dollars from state to the county? How can we ensure that this isn't going to cost $100 million a year to do? I think Texas had a really good one. I mean, we're seeing 100 to $200 million. We got fiscal notes going pretty high in some of the states that made us chuckle. We know it doesn't cost that much. But I would like to know, we've got fact sheets about costs, and if people have other cost arguments that have been effective or cost outcomes that they can share, this would be really good for states that are in the middle of implementation or the 3 states who haven't yet managed to raise the age. The second question that we feel has happened a lot is what additional or follow-up legislation passed in states that raise the age to address any necessary adjustments, right? What were tweaks that your state had to make in terms of legislation, in terms of the raise the age legislation in future years in order to, correct mistakes or further refine their laws to make raise the age successful? So if there's, kind of follow-up legislation that you passed, we would love to hear more about that. Both so states can think about it in the front end, right? So jail removal is a big one. We know North Carolina went back last year and added jail removal and got that through. New York, Cuomo had it in his budget this year to do the same, not just in New York City, but statewide. So really, what do we need to do in terms of follow-up legislation to make sure that as many kids as possible are out of the adult system? And then this is something that's just come up this week about the school to prison pipeline. We know that most 16 and 17-year-olds are engaged in very low level behaviors, misdemeanors, drug possessions, things that do not in any way, shape or form, and I would argue don't even need justice engagement, but certainly don't need any sort of secure placement. We are hearing in the past 3 weeks that because schools are closed, referrals to juvenile court are dropping incredibly, right? That's a school to prison pipeline, just, data point that I think is really, really important. But just wondering if there are ways for you guys to get those numbers during this time period, would that be a helpful data point to show that when school's out, referrals go down tremendously? I'm going to take a pause here and see if there's any other questions that you guys, the people who have already raised the age, if there's other questions I should be asking here, or those of you who are in states that haven't yet raised the age. These are kind of very big buckets, but I just wanted to start with the ones that we've heard the most.
Yeah, so if folks would like to raise their hand, I'm happy to unmute you, or if you want as well, you can type the question into the question box. I don't know if folks have thoughts on these questions or additional questions you should be asking.
And again, Allison's going to post this and we'll post it as well. So if you need to chew on this for a little bit to see whether or not these are helpful, certainly there's time to give us input after this. I will also say, in addition to these, the JPI report that talked about kind of the 10 different steps to raise the age, it talked about validated risk assessments that also ensure you're not increasing disparities, mental health alternatives, drug and substance abuse alternatives. There was a lot, expanding community-based services, diversion practices. There was like 9 or 10 things. So these are certainly just the ones we've heard most recently from folks. But if there are other, but that's another good place to look at what other states were doing to kind of get ready for raising the age. Next slide, Allison.
There we go.
Thanks. So that first slide was really about kind of what needs to happen to help states get there. But this is more of a question for us. You know, when the campaign closes down, what trends or data or fact sheets are needed around Raise the Age nationally, right? What stakeholders do you need to hear from and public support from? You know, as I said earlier, we've gotten a lot from many of these stakeholders, but if we need to find a way to get, you know, probation officers to sign off on a letter, or judges have had pretty good guidelines on this in their practice. But if there's other people, public health now, you know, we're hearing a lot more from public health as this pandemic happens. Do they need to weigh in on Raise the Age? Who are validators that we could be getting policy statements or data statements from that would help you in your Raise the Age moving forward? What resources are needed to get the last 3 states? Do you need polling? Do you need, what's that called? Cost benefit studies. What is it that you need in those last 3 states? You need money to have lobbying, advocacy days on the Hill. What are things like that you need, reports to get to a win? The other question is, are there states other than the ones that I mentioned that are interested in raising the age beyond 18? We work really closely with the Columbia Justice Lab and LAL. You know, are there things that we could be passing on to them to help beyond 18? And then again, asking you for other questions and ideas. But this is really, what do you need from CFYJ before the end of the year to make sure that you have what you need in your toolbox to win this if you're still fighting, and to implement fully if you're still implementing, and to go farther if you're already there.
Yeah, so Marcy, I just wanted to react because I do feel like we've heard from some states already about what might be helpful. So I think, to your point, a lot of folks are working to raise the age beyond 18, which is incredible. And I know we've seen it lately. I think we were trying to count the other day. It was like 18 states are working on it or sort of thinking through proposals. And I know a big question that they're sort of working through is, what does that look like, and how do you house those kids safely with kids under 18? And luckily there are some states already doing it, which are serving as good models, but seems like questions we get a lot. And then in terms of stakeholders, we've heard a lot about the need for sheriffs to provide input. So I know those are some things we often hear. I'm not sure. I see some folks on the phone who are working on the raising the age beyond 18, so I don't know if those folks want to jump in or if other folks have questions, but just wanted to share that.
Yep. And I will say the National Sheriff's Association did put out a very clear statement in support of raising the age. So again, to cross-reference that with members in your states, with sheriffs who are members of NSA, I think is really important. And Amos at LEAP is more than willing to work with states to get either former sheriffs, or it's easier for him to get former sheriffs to come out in support of this. And there's also folks at the NSA that we could get mobilized around this as well. So knowing which counties and where that's a problem, we can get other sheriffs to talk to them.
Anyone else have questions or things that they wanted to share? Checking the question box one more time. Yeah, it looks like Justice added a comment in saying that in general, we feel like the moral arguments won, but that sheriffs and sometimes DAs are still slow to come along. And so I think the resources you mentioned in terms of stakeholder groups that are coming out in support of it is helpful.
Yeah. And again, if you guys have that for specific counties, if you can shoot that to us, we can work on getting that done. One thing that I know that was very effective in Michigan was to find key counties where there is kind of opposition and get them to pass county-based resolutions in support of raising the age. That really changed the conversation with their state county association from, well, we support this, but to, okay, this is how we need to figure it out. So I would strongly support county-based resolutions to get both those stakeholders on board, because you will break up the statewide association's position on this. And it didn't take many. I think Michigan had 4 or 5 resolutions that got them over. And if Jason or somebody from Michigan's on, I can't see who's on, but that would be, feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, I don't think Jason's on, but I do think that that's a helpful strategy in Wisconsin for sure. As I know, their issue is always a couple counties, so
yep,
we'll be sure to share it with our folks there.
Great. All right. So what are our next steps in terms of raising the age, right? So we would love to get this input from you guys and from others in the field by June. We will develop the resources and release them between July and September. And then we will identify specific supports. We're going to focus on these 3 states between October and December. And so again, you know, with all of our help, I think these guys can get there. If there are sheriffs in states who have raised the age that you think would be willing to talk positively about this, or DAs that would be willing to do this and to go to other states, I think, you know, if people are having their annual CLEs in the summer, even if they're virtual, if we could connect them to folks in other states, that's really, really helpful. So if you have names of people and can connect us in states that have done this, I think that that's another really good strategy, even if they're working behind the scenes. I know that this is all a little bit crazy given COVID-19, but I think this is still what we're kind of aiming to do at this point.
Yeah, I feel like it's an ambitious timeline, but it stands the test of time. There was one comment that folks just wanted you to reiterate, Marcy, that while the campaign is closing, that you personally aren't going away and are, I don't know if that's something that you wanted to say, but other folks have volunteered that for you.
Yes, I don't know what I'm doing next. And I know April will be consulting, our communications person will be consulting. Brian will also be consulting in the short term. And what I'm trying to do right now is to raise money to be a fellow at the Sentencing Project so that I can help work with Josh and the Sentencing Project to help kind of those 4 or 5 states get over the line next year. And so that's another reason that we want to know what you need in your state. So as we're trying to raise money to get to states, we're able to have a kind of a menu of options. So at least, you know, I don't know how this is going to shift. I don't know how this pandemic is going to shift funding, but prior to 2 weeks ago, that was looking really, really good. And we thought we would have enough funding to get us through the 2021 session. And then I don't know, then I have to find a job.
Fair enough. I think it's comforting to know that you won't disappear as a sinner.
No, if people have good ideas, I don't know. All I know is I'm not going to be an executive director. Allison, are there other? Thanks, guys.
I don't see other questions coming through, but if folks have them, please feel free to pop them in the question box again, or again, raise your hand.
Okay. Well, let me just talk about why don't we just talk about why don't we just talk about the dates of the next webinars?
Yeah, for sure.
Which is the last slide. So just so you guys know, and we're going to open these next two up to a broader audience. We kind of wanted it to be the close, folks we're closest to at NJJN and our own listservs. But April 21st, we're going to really be talking about jail removal efforts. And you should know that we do have a combined brief with CJCA talking about jail removal. And also with CCLP are talking about really working on this. This, interestingly enough, has not gotten any pushback from OJJDP. So I think that given the number of states that introduced jail removal efforts, Rachel, before she moved on to the Hill, did redline statute for the states that presume adult facilities for any child that is certified as an adult. So we already do have a lot of red line language. If that's something that you think would be helpful in your state, you should get ready to talk to us about that. And then May 19th is really focusing on automatic transfer. So that is where we are. Again, I just want to say to this group of people on the call from our NJJN allies, like, we could not have done this.
Marcy, you cut out.
There?
Yeah, now you're here. Yeah, we heard part of you and then you just went silent. Maybe you aren't there. Go ahead.
Oh God, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, by
Okay.
all means.
So just saying that, this movement, particularly around Raise the Age, has been successful because you guys have been bold and tenacious, and you haven't given up, and you've worked and reworked strategies and leaned out to each other, reached out to each other. And I just feel like it has been such an honor to be part of that, and to be able to share your incredible brilliance with each other and be in a position where we're able to circulate this.
Marcy, you cut out again. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what's happening, but as we're wrapping up, I will echo NJJN's thanks for Marcy and for CFYJ, and say that we will continue to have these conversations as the campaign winds down, and are grateful for all of you guys for joining us, and hope that you guys stay safe, and we'll circle back with you guys. Have a good afternoon, and really do stay safe. Bye, guys.